Julian Moore was standing inside a glass elevator, 40 floors above Manhattan, watching the city glow beneath him like something he owned. The skyline stretched endlessly, sharp and confident, just like the life he believed he had built. His tailored suit sat perfectly on his shoulders. His Mont Blanc pen rested in his jacket pocket. In less than 2 minutes, he would step into a boardroom where people listened when he spoke. His phone vibrated. He barely glanced at it. Another notification. Probably work. Nothing ever mattered more than work anymore. Then he saw the name. Elena. His wife rarely texted during the day. She knew his schedule. She knew his priorities. Or at least, she used to. The elevator slowed. Julian unlocked his phone with one hand, irritation already forming in his chest. The message was short. Too short. I've moved forward. Please respect that you're no longer part of my life. That was it. No explanation, no accusation, no emotion. Julian let out a small breath, almost a laugh. This again. Elena had always been dramatic when she felt ignored. She would cool down, she always did. The elevator doors opened, voices spilled in from the hallway. Laughter, the familiar hum of power and money. Julian stepped out, slid his phone into his pocket, and walked toward the boardroom. But something felt off. He sat down at the long, polished table, nodded at his partners, opened his MacBook, and tried to focus. Numbers filled the screen, forecasts, projections. Yet the words from that message kept resurfacing, sharp and calm, in a way Elena had never been before. Moved forward. He checked his phone again under the table. No follow-up message, no missed calls, just silence. Julian frowned. Elena was not good at silence. The meeting began. He spoke when spoken to. He nodded at the right moments, but his thoughts drifted back to the apartment, to the quiet mornings, to the way Elena used to wait up for him, dinner cold but untouched, just in case he came home early. He hadn't noticed when she stopped doing that. Halfway through the meeting, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Elena, it was the building concierge. Mr. Moore, just confirming. Mrs. Moore has requested her access be removed from the residence, effective immediately. Julian felt something tighten in his chest. Removed? He typed back quickly. There must be a mistake. I have, end quote. The reply came almost instantly. No mistake, sir. She handled everything personally this morning. Morning. Julian's mouth went dry. Elena never handled things personally. She asked first. She waited. She adjusted herself around his life. A strange realization crept in, slow and uncomfortable. She hadn't asked this time. The meeting room felt smaller, the glass walls suddenly too transparent, as if everyone could see the crack forming beneath his calm expression. Julian excused himself, standing up so abruptly that the chair scraped against the floor. As he walked out, phone clenched in his hand, one thought repeated in his mind, louder with every step. Elena didn't leave in anger. She left prepared. And whatever she had done, she had already finished doing it. For 9 years, Elena Moore had lived inside Julian's life without truly being seen. She learned early how to exist quietly beside a man who believed silence meant peace. When Julian worked late, she reheated dinner without complaint. When he canceled plans, she smiled and said she understood. Understanding became her second language, spoken fluently even when it hurt. In the early years, Julian used to notice. He would text her from meetings, little updates, inside crowded rooms, grounding himself. Elena held on to those memories longer than she should have, like photographs from a life that no longer existed. Over time, the noticing stopped. Julian didn't say he loved her less. He simply assumed she would always be there. Elena became the background of his success, the quiet structure that allowed everything else to shine. She managed the household, remembered birthdays, handled insurance calls, and smoothed over conflicts with family. She became efficient, reliable, invisible. Some nights, she sat alone in their apartment on Park Avenue, city lights flickering through the windows. Her phone rested beside her untouched dinner. She told herself he was building something important. That sacrifice was part of love. But sacrifice without acknowledgement slowly turns into erasure. Julian didn't notice when Elena stopped asking how his day was. He didn't notice when she stopped reminding him to eat. He didn't notice the way she began sleeping, closer to the edge of the bed, as if making space for someone who wasn't there. What he did notice were results. Promotions. Applause. Recognition from people who only saw the version of him that arrived polished and prepared. That version existed because Elena made sure everything else stayed quiet. One evening, Elena waited for him with a small cake. It was her birthday. Nothing extravagant, just a candle, a moment. Julian texted that he'd be late. Then later, then not at all. She didn't cry that night. She blew out the candle herself, washed the plate, and threw the cake away. Something in her shifted, subtle but permanent. From that moment on, Elena began observing her life as if it belonged to someone else. She noticed how rarely Julian looked at her when she spoke, how conversations became logistical, how affection turned into habit, then disappeared altogether. She tried, once, to explain. Julian listened with half attention, then told her she was overthinking, that she had everything she needed, that he was doing this for them. That word stopped meaning anything. Elena learned to carry her loneliness with dignity. She read late at night, drank her coffee in silence, and built emotional walls so well even she almost believed they weren't there. Loving Julian became something she did alone. By the time the message arrived on his phone years later, the truth was already written. Julian thought Elena left suddenly, but she had been leaving for years. There was one day Elena Moore still replayed in her mind, not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary in the most devastating way. It started with dizziness. Elena noticed it early that morning while brushing her teeth. The room tilted slightly, then steadied. She pressed her hand against the marble sink, breathing slowly until the sensation passed. Stress, she told herself. It was always stress. That was the answer Julian liked best. She checked her calendar on her phone. A medical appointment at noon. Routine, but important. The doctor had insisted she come in after her last visit. Elevated blood pressure, chronic fatigue. Warnings wrapped in professional calm. Elena hesitated before texting Julian. She knew his schedule. She always knew his schedule. Still, she typed carefully. Could you come with me today? The appointment might take a while. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Of course, Julian replied. I'll make it work. Relief washed over her, surprising in its intensity. She realized how rarely she allowed herself to need him anymore. By noon, Elena sat alone in the waiting room. She checked her phone. No messages. She told herself he was running late. She had done that many times before. When the nurse called her name, Elena stood, smoothing her coat, still expecting Julian to walk in at the last second with an apologetic smile. He didn't. The exam room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of a machine. The doctor spoke gently, explaining how prolonged stress could affect the body in ways people often ignored until it was too late. She asked about Elena's support system, her workload, her home life. Elena answered politely, vaguely. She was good at that. When the appointment ended, she stepped outside into the cold air and finally checked her phone again. One missed text. Emergency meeting. Can't get out. Rain check? Elena stared at the screen. No apology, no question, just a statement. She typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted that too. In the end, she wrote nothing. Instead, she walked toward Central Park and sat on a bench, her coat pulled tight around her. People passed by. Couples, tourists, parents with children. Life moved forward without noticing her small, quiet disappointment. Elena thought about how easily Julian had said yes that morning, how easily he had taken it back. That was when it became clear. Julian didn't choose work over her once or twice. He chose it every time. Automatically, without thinking. And she had been adjusting herself around that choice for years. She opened the Kindle in her bag, not really reading, just staring at the words. A sentence caught her attention, sharp and unexpected. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Elena closed the book slowly. For the first time, she wondered what would happen if she stopped waiting. If she stopped asking. If she let Julian live exactly the life he was choosing without her quietly holding it together. That afternoon, Elena didn't go home right away. She walked, she thought, and something inside her shifted from hope to clarity. Julian believed he had time. Elena had just realized she didn't. Elena first heard the name Sloane Whitaker in passing. Julian mentioned her one evening while scrolling through emails on his MacBook. Tone casual, almost careless. We brought in a communications consultant today. Smart, efficient, gets it. Gets it. Elena nodded from across the kitchen island, where she was chopping vegetables for a dinner Julian would likely miss. She had learned not to ask follow-up questions when his voice carried that particular note of approval. Praise like that was reserved for people who existed outside their marriage. Sloane didn't appear all at once. She entered Julian's life the way humidity fills a room quietly, gradually, until the air feels different and you can't remember when it changed. Her name began showing up more often. Sloane thinks this approach will play better. Sloane flagged a potential optics issue. Julian spoke about her as if she were an extension of his own thoughts. Elena listened, feeling something tighten each time, though she couldn't yet name it. The first time Elena saw her was at a corporate charity event downtown. Julian had insisted Elena come, saying it would look good. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but unremarkable, the kind of outfit chosen to avoid attention. Sloane stood near Julian, tall and composed, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if it belonged there. She laughed at something he said, eyes fixed on his face with practiced focus. Elena watched from across the room. Sloane noticed her almost immediately. Their eyes met, and Sloane smiled, not a warm smile, a calculated one. The kind that acknowledged presence without offering respect. "This must be Elena," Sloane said when Julian introduced them. Her tone was smooth, professional. "Julian talks about you all the time." Elena knew that wasn't true. Julian didn't correct her. Throughout the evening, Elena observed small things. How Julian leaned closer when Sloane spoke. How he checked his phone when Elena tried to engage him. How Sloane never crossed a visible line, yet somehow occupied space that didn't belong to her. On the drive home, Elena finally asked, carefully, "Do you think your relationship with her might look confusing to others?" Julian sighed, already annoyed. "You're reading into things again. She's a colleague. You're imagining problems that don't exist." That word again. Imagining. The next morning, Elena found a photo in Julian's open laptop gallery. A group picture from the event. Sloane stood beside him, angled just right, her hand still on his arm. Elena was cropped out. Something in her went cold. That evening, she asked Julian a single question, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Do you still want this marriage?" Julian didn't hesitate. "Of course, why would you even ask that?" But he didn't look at her when he answered. That was when Elena understood the real danger wasn't Sloane. It was the way Julian had already decided Elena would never leave. And the moment a man becomes that certain, he stops being careful. After that night, Elena Moore stopped trying to be understood. She didn't confront Julian again. She didn't ask questions. She didn't check his phone or watch the clock when he came home late. To Julian, it probably looked like acceptance, peace even. He mistook her quiet for surrender, the way men often do when they've never had to listen closely. What he didn't know was that Elena had begun preparing. The first step was financial, though it didn't feel dramatic at the time. One afternoon during lunch, she opened a new checking account in her own name. No confrontation, no announcement. Just a quiet decision made in a small office with neutral walls and a polite banker who didn't ask personal questions. Elena transferred modest amounts at first, nothing noticeable, amounts easily explained away as routine expenses. She learned how controlled her life had become without realizing it. Julian handled investments. Julian optimized taxes. Julian decided what was efficient. Elena had agreed to it years ago because she trusted him, because it seemed practical. Now she saw the truth clearly. Dependence had been disguised as convenience. At night, after Julian fell asleep or didn't come home at all, Elena sat at the dining table with her laptop open. She organized documents. Insurance policies, property records, employment contracts. She backed everything up onto a small external drive and slid it into her bag each morning like a habit, not a secret. There was no panic in her movements. Only focus. She met Marianne Cole on a gray Thursday afternoon in a quiet cafe away from Julian's usual orbit. Marianne didn't offer sympathy. She offered clarity. She explained options, timelines, risks. She listened while Elena spoke, really spoke, perhaps for the first time in years. "You're not late," Marianne said gently when Elena worried she had waited too long. "You're just ready." That sentence stayed with her. At home, Elena began to detach emotionally in small, deliberate ways. She stopped filling Julian's calendar with reminders. stopped answering his work calls immediately, stopped arranging her life around the possibility that he might choose her. Julian noticed the difference, but misread it completely. "You seem calmer," he said one evening, loosening his tie. "I'm glad you're not overthinking things anymore." Elena smiled faintly. "Me too." He took that as a victory. The final step was physical. Marianne recommended Elena find a place of her own before saying anything. Somewhere safe, somewhere finished. Elena toured apartments quietly, choosing one not for luxury, but for peace. When she signed the lease in Brooklyn Heights, her hand didn't shake. That night, an Amazon box arrived at the apartment. Julian barely glanced at it. Inside were folders, a new lockbox, and a simple notebook. Elena labeled the first page with a date. She wasn't planning revenge. She wasn't rehearsing speeches. She was closing doors carefully, one by one. Julian believed Elena was finally adapting to his life. He didn't realize she was learning how to live without him. By the time he would ask what had changed, every decision would already be made. And for the first time in years, Elena felt something unexpected settle into her chest. Control. The evidence didn't arrive all at once. It revealed itself in fragments, the way truth often does when it has been hiding in plain sight. Elena noticed it on a quiet Saturday morning while reviewing household expenses. Julian was away on another business retreat, and the apartment felt hollow without the constant tension. She sat at the dining table with her laptop, coffee growing out of habit more than suspicion. Then she paused. A charge stood out, not because of the amount, but because of the place, a restaurant in Midtown she had never been to. 2 nights in a row, followed by a boutique hotel she recognized instantly. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. Elena didn't panic. She didn't cry. She simply kept scrolling. More charges appeared. Car service receipts at odd hours, floral deliveries she had never received. Each line item felt like a quiet confirmation of something she had already known but refused to name. What struck her most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the ease. Julian hadn't hidden it carefully. He hadn't needed to. He assumed she wouldn't look, or that if she did, she would explain it away for him, the way she always had. Elena closed the laptop and sat back, heart steady, mind sharp. The pain arrived later, but first came clarity. She took screenshots. Not obsessively, methodically. She saved them in a folder labeled Records, then backed them up onto the same external drive she carried every day. There was no satisfaction in it, no thrill. Only the calm of knowing where she stood. That afternoon, she met Marianne Cole again. Marianne didn't react with outrage when Elena showed her the statements. She nodded, unsurprised. "This helps," she said simply. "Not because it proves infidelity, but because it shows financial patterns." Elena understood transparency. That mattered. Quietly, legally, it mattered. Back at home, Elena went through her evening routine as usual. She folded laundry, watered the plants, prepared a simple dinner she barely touched. When Julian called later, his voice sounded relaxed, almost cheerful. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," Elena replied. The word felt neutral in her mouth. "Everything's fine." And for the first time, it was true. That night, alone in the bedroom, Elena allowed herself to feel it. The ache settled deep, slow, and heavy. Not rage, not shock, grief. Grief for the years she had poured into a man who had been slowly spending her away. She didn't lash out. She didn't confront him. Instead, she opened her notebook and wrote down another date, another line. Each entry wasn't about him. It was about her boundaries. The following week, Elena signed the lease for her apartment in Brooklyn Heights. She chose the move-in date carefully, aligning it with Julian's travel schedule. Every detail was deliberate now. Julian continued his life, confident and unaware. He thought Elena had accepted less. He didn't realize she had stopped accepting anything at all. By the time he would understand the cost of his ignorance, the bill would already be paid. And Elena would be gone. Elena chose the day carefully. Julian was scheduled to be out of town for 48 hours, attending a conference he had barely explained. She knew the pattern well enough not to ask questions. By then, questions no longer belonged in her life. The morning he left, Elena moved through the apartment slowly, deliberately, as if committing every detail to memory. The quiet was different that day. Not heavy, clean. She packed only what mattered. Clothes she had bought for herself, not for events Julian wanted her to attend. Documents she had copied and organized weeks earlier. Personal items that carried meaning rather than history. She left behind the furniture, the art, the expensive things chosen to match an image that no longer fit her. There was no anger in her movements, no shaking hands, just resolve. By noon, the apartment looked untouched. Too untouched. The absence wouldn't be obvious until someone knew where to look. Elena walked through each room one last time. The bedroom, where she had learned how lonely silence could be. The kitchen, where she had waited with dinners that went cold. The living room where conversations had slowly turned into logistics. She didn't cry. She placed her wedding ring inside a small envelope and set it on the entry table. No note, no explanation. Julian wouldn't need one. Everything he had ignored was already written between the years. The moving service arrived quietly, efficient, and professional. Within an hour, Elena's life fit into a small truck and the trunk of her car. As the doors closed, something inside her chest loosened, subtle but real. Her new apartment in Brooklyn Heights felt unfamiliar but safe. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The rooms were smaller, simpler. Elena unpacked slowly, setting each item in place as if reclaiming territory. She changed the lock code. She placed her notebook in the top drawer of the desk. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and let herself breathe. That evening, she ordered takeout from a small neighborhood place. She ate at the counter, listening to the quiet hum of the building, realizing how little noise she needed now. When Julian called that night, she didn't answer. When he texted, she read it without reaction. "Everything okay?" Another message followed an hour later. "Why aren't you responding?" Elena turned her phone face down. The next morning, she sent the message she had already drafted days earlier. The one that ended everything without opening a door. "I've moved forward. Please respect that you're no longer part of my life." She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't check for typing bubbles. She went for a walk instead, down tree-lined streets that didn't know her past. Miles away, Julian would panic, confused by the lack of drama, the absence of explanation. But Elena knew the truth. Leaving loudly invites pursuit. Leaving quietly ends the chase. As the city moved around her, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not triumph. Freedom. Julian Moore realized something was wrong the moment he stepped into the apartment. At first, he couldn't say what it was. Everything looked the same. The furniture was still in place. The artwork still hung neatly on the walls. The air even smelled familiar. A mix of polished wood and the faint citrus cleaner Elena preferred. But the quiet felt different, too complete. He set his briefcase down and called out her name without thinking. No answer. He checked his phone again, irritation creeping in. Still nothing. No missed calls, no new messages. That was unusual. Elena always replied, even when she was upset. Julian walked toward the bedroom. That was when the details began to register. The closet looked wrong. Empty spaces where her clothes should have been. Shoes missing. The drawer where she kept her jewelry was half bare, the small velvet box gone. His chest tightened. "Elena," he called again, louder this time. He moved faster now, crossing into the kitchen. Her coffee mug was gone. The plant she watered every morning had been moved closer to the window, as if prepared to survive without her daily care. On the entry table, an envelope waited. Julian recognized it instantly. His wedding ring lay inside, cold and impersonal, as if it had never belonged to either of them. No note, no apology, no explanation. For the first time, panic cut through his composure. He pulled out his phone and called her again, straight to voicemail. He texted, his messages shifting quickly from irritation to confusion. "Where are you? This isn't funny. Let's talk." Nothing. Julian opened his laptop and checked the building app. Elena's access had been removed. He scrolled faster, disbelief turning into dread. She hadn't left impulsively. She had dismantled her presence with precision. He called the concierge. "Yes, sir," the man said politely. Mrs. Moore handled the request herself. She was very clear. Clear. The word echoed unpleasantly. Julian sank onto the couch, staring at the space where Elena used to sit in the evenings, reading quietly while he worked. He replayed the past few months in his mind, searching for the moment he should have noticed. There were too many. Her calm, her silence, the way she stopped waiting. His phone buzzed. Relief flared, sharp and desperate. But it wasn't Elena, it was Sloane. Back already? Her message read. Thought we could grab dinner. Tubo. Julian stared at the screen, suddenly unsure how to respond. Something about the message felt wrong now. Flat. Opportunistic. He didn't reply. Instead, he opened his messages with Elena again and reread the one line she had sent. I've moved forward. Julian felt a chill settle in his stomach. She hadn't asked him to change. She hadn't threatened. She hadn't explained herself. She had already decided, and the most unsettling part wasn't that Elena had left. It was the realization that she had done it without needing him to understand. For the first time in years, Julian was alone in a space that still looked like his life, but no longer felt like it. Julian didn't sleep that night. The apartment felt hostile now, as if it rejected him. Every surface carried evidence of Elena's absence, not through emptiness, but through intention. She hadn't fled. She had withdrawn herself cleanly, leaving him alone with the echo of his own neglect. By morning, panic replaced disbelief. Julian tried again. Calls, texts, emails. Each attempt met the same response. Nothing. No reaction. No anger. No explanation. The silence pressed harder than any argument ever had. At work, he failed to hide it. He sat in his office overlooking Midtown, staring at a stock ticker that refused to hold his attention. Numbers blurred together. His phone remained face up on the desk, as if Elena might suddenly break the pattern and reach out. She didn't. By noon, Julian made a decision he had avoided his entire marriage. He asked for help. Marianne Cole's office was quiet, professional, impersonal. Julian paced while waiting, irritation mixing with unease. When Marianne entered, her expression was calm, unreadable, not hostile, not sympathetic. I need to speak to my wife, Julian said immediately. This has gone too far. Marianne folded her hands. Elena has asked that all communication go through me. Julian scoffed. That's unnecessary. We're married. Marianne met his gaze steadily. You are separated. The word landed heavily. Julian leaned forward. She didn't say that. She didn't need to, Marianne replied. Her actions did. Julian felt his composure slipping. This is extreme. She left without warning. Marianne didn't argue. She reached into a folder and slid a document across the desk. A timeline. Dates, notes, appointment records, missed commitments, financial discrepancies. Julian's jaw tightened as he scanned the pages. You've been absent for a long time, Marianne said evenly. Elena documented it quietly. She didn't do this to punish you. She did it to protect herself. Julian pushed the papers away. She's being dramatic. Marianne didn't flinch. That word has been used against her for years. It no longer works. The truth settled in slowly, uncomfortably. Elena wasn't asking for reassurance. She wasn't threatening to leave unless he changed. She wasn't negotiating. She had already left. Julian stood abruptly. I want to see her. You won't, Marianne said. Not right now. Who are you to decide that? Julian snapped. I'm the person she trusted when she realized you never would, Marianne replied calmly. For the first time, Julian felt something close to fear. Not fear of losing his marriage. Fear of losing control. As he left the office, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sloane. You've been quiet, she wrote. Everything okay? Julian stared at the message, then turned his phone face down. It was happening on all sides now. The life he thought was stable was shifting, slipping beyond his reach. Elena had stepped out of the role he assigned her, and without her, everything felt exposed. Julian had always believed Elena needed him. That day, he realized the opposite might be true. And the worst part was this. She had discovered it before he did. Elena Moore did not disappear. She simply reappeared somewhere Julian never thought to look. Her new mornings began quietly. No rushing to match someone else's schedule. No checking her phone for cancellations disguised as apologies. She woke early in her Brooklyn Heights apartment, sunlight slipping through the curtains, the city sounding softer here. Different. Human. She made coffee and drank it slowly. At work, Elena became someone else, not a new person, but the version she had been holding back for years. Without the constant emotional drain of compensating for Julian's absence, her focus sharpened. She spoke with confidence in meetings. She questioned assumptions. She stopped shrinking her ideas to make others comfortable. That was when Adrian Hale noticed her. Adrian was the CEO of a global medical logistics firm, known for being demanding but fair. He didn't compliment easily. When he did, it was earned. Elena had worked under his extended network for years, reliable but understated. Now, she stood out. "Your analysis is solid," he told her after a review call. "Why haven't you pushed for more responsibility?" Elena didn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated. "I'm ready now," she said instead. Adrian nodded, as if that was all he needed to hear. Within weeks, Elena was given oversight of a major restructuring project. The hours were long, the pressure real, but the work energized her. For the first time, she felt aligned with her own effort. What she built belonged to her. In the evenings, she focused on healing with the same discipline she brought to work. Therapy sessions, long walks, reading. She finished books she had once skimmed just to appear productive. Now, she read to understand herself. She wrote in her notebook every night not about Julian, but about patterns, boundaries, the difference between love and endurance. Some nights were harder than others. There were moments when memory crept in unexpectedly. A song, a street corner, the echo of a version of herself who had believed patience would be rewarded. Elena let those moments pass without judgment. She no longer chased them away, but she didn't follow them either. Julian tried to reach her again. Emails routed through Marianne. Voicemails left unanswered. Messages that shifted from anger to regret to pleading. Elena didn't listen. She didn't need to. Closure wasn't something Julian could give her. One afternoon, as Elena left the office late, Adrian walked beside her toward the elevators. "You seem lighter," he observed casually. Elena smiled. "I stopped carrying what wasn't mine." Adrian glanced at her, understanding flickering behind his expression. He didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He simply respected the space she had claimed. That respect felt unfamiliar and powerful. Elena returned home that night and stood by the window, looking out at the city. Manhattan glittered in the distance, beautiful but no longer intimidating. She realized something then. She hadn't won anything yet, but she had regained herself. And that was the foundation everything else would stand on. Julian had lost control. Elena had gained direction, and the balance between them had shifted forever. Julian's life began to unravel in places he never expected. It didn't happen publicly at first. There were no headlines, no dramatic confrontations, just small fractures that spread quietly, the way damage always does when it goes ignored for too long. At work, Julian found himself rereading emails he had already answered. He missed details he never used to miss. During meetings, his mind drifted, looping back to Elena's silence, to the empty apartment, to the unsettling calm with which she had removed herself from his life. People noticed. A junior partner corrected him once, gently, in front of others. Julian brushed it off, but the moment stayed with him. He had built his authority on certainty. Doubt did not suit him. Sloane noticed too. She had been patient at first, sending light messages, checking in with careful warmth. But as Julian grew distracted, less responsive, something in her tone shifted. The curiosity became calculation. "You seem off lately," she said one evening over drinks, watching him closely. "Is everything okay at home?" Julian stiffened. "It's being handled. If you seeks of never." Sloane smiled, but her eyes didn't soften. "I just don't want any complications." The word lingered unpleasantly between them. That night, Julian realized something unsettling. Sloane hadn't been drawn to him for who he was beneath the success. She had been drawn to momentum, status, stability. And now, he was beginning to lose all three. Days later, an email surfaced in his inbox by mistake. It wasn't meant for him. Sloane had forwarded a resume hers to Adrian Hale's firm, pitching herself as a strategic communications asset. The language was bold, confident, and painfully revealing. She had already been planning her exit. Julian felt a cold wave wash through him as the realization set in. Elena hadn't been the only one preparing quietly. The difference was that Elena left with dignity. Sloane was simply looking for her next advantage. When Julian confronted her, she didn't deny it. "You're under a lot of stress," she said calmly. "I need to think about my own future too." There was no apology, no pretense of loyalty, Julian drove home afterward in silence, gripping the steering wheel as anger and humiliation tangled in his chest. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be replaceable. At the apartment, he poured a drink he didn't want and sat alone, staring at the city lights. He thought about Elena then, not with entitlement, but with something closer to regret. She had never asked for luxury, never demanded attention. She had only asked to matter. And he had ignored her. The cruel irony settled in slowly. Elena had walked away when she still had power. Sloane was leaving because he no longer did. Julian checked his phone again, half hoping, half fearing Elena might finally respond. There was nothing, no message, no sign she even noticed his unraveling. That silence hurt more than any confrontation could have. Because it told him the truth he could no longer avoid. Elena hadn't left him for someone else. She had left him behind. Julian found Elena on a Tuesday evening he hadn't planned for. It was raining, the kind of steady New York rain that soaked through everything without drama. He stood across the street from the office building in Brooklyn Heights, where he knew she worked now, coat collar turned up, watching people exit with tired faces and purposeful steps. He told himself he was there to talk, to explain, to fix something. But when Elena appeared, he forgot every sentence he had rehearsed. She walked out calmly, a slim laptop bag over her shoulder, phone in hand, posture straight. She looked different. Not styled differently, not dressed differently. Different in a way Julian couldn't immediately name. Grounded. "Elena," he called before he could stop himself. She turned. Not startled, not relieved, just attentive, like someone acknowledging a stranger who knew her name. They stood facing each other under the streetlight, rain filling the space between them. "I asked you not to come," Elena said quietly. Julian swallowed. "I needed to see you." She studied him for a moment. Not his suit or his face, but something deeper, as if checking whether the man in front of her still held any authority over her emotions. "You're standing in my life again," she said evenly. "I didn't invite you." The words landed harder than any accusation. Julian stepped closer, desperation breaking through his control. "I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. I was under pressure. I thought—" "You thought I would wait," Elena interrupted. He stopped. Rain traced lines down her coat. She didn't move to step under cover. She didn't seem cold. "I did wait," she continued. "For years. Quietly, faithfully. I waited until waiting started to cost me my health, my voice, my sense of worth." Julian shook his head. "I never meant to hurt you." Elena nodded once. "I know. That's what made it worse." He reached out instinctively, then hesitated, his hand falling back to his side. For the first time, he wasn't sure he had the right to touch her. "I can change," he said. "Just tell me what you need." Elena let out a slow breath. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You're asking the wrong question," she said. "You're asking what you can do now that I'm gone. You never asked what I needed when I was still here." Silence stretched between them, thick and final. Julian felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't negotiation. This was an ending. "I survived the version of you I loved," Elena added softly. "I don't need to prove that again." She stepped back, creating space with intention. "I hope you figure out why you only listen when something leaves," she said. "But you won't learn it from me." Without waiting for a response, Elena turned and walked away, her footsteps steady on the wet pavement. Julian stood there as the rain soaked through his coat, watching her disappear into the building behind him. For the first time, he understood. He hadn't lost Elena that day. He had lost her long before, and this was just the moment he finally saw it. Julian believed he still had one advantage left: control of the narrative. For years, he had been skilled at shaping perception at work, in social circles, even inside his marriage. When things felt unstable, he tightened his grip, reframed the story, positioned himself as reasonable, while others appeared emotional or difficult. This time, he tried the same tactic. Quietly, carefully, Julian began planting suggestions. Elena was overwhelmed. She had been under stress. She made a sudden decision. Friends heard it first, then colleagues. Nothing overt. Just enough doubt to soften the truth. He told himself it was self-protection. What he didn't know was that Elena had already anticipated this. Marianne Cole called Julian 2 days later. "I'm advising you to stop," she said calmly. "Stop what?" Julian asked, irritation flaring. Stop attempting to undermine Elena's credibility, Marianne replied. It won't end the way you think. Julian scoffed. I'm not doing anything wrong. Marianne paused, then sent him a file. Julian opened it and felt his stomach drop. Emails, calendar logs, financial timestamps. A clear, chronological record of missed commitments, canceled plans, unanswered messages. Medical appointment notes. Even internal work messages where Julian referred to Elena dismissively, never expecting she would see them. It wasn't dramatic. It was devastatingly precise. You documented everything? Julian muttered. She did, Marianne said, because she knew one day she might need to defend reality. Julian felt exposed in a way he never had before, not accused but revealed. And there's more, Marianne continued. Your consultant, Sloane Whitaker. Julian stiffened. Marianne forwarded another set of documents. Emails Sloane had sent internally, boasting about her proximity to Julian. Messages where she implied influence she didn't officially have. Language that crossed professional boundaries in ways that now looked dangerous. She used your name, Marianne said evenly, and you allowed it. Julian understood immediately. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was corporate liability. Within days, an internal review was launched. Quiet, but serious. Sloane was placed on leave pending investigation. Her confident tone vanished overnight, replaced by short, frantic messages Julian didn't respond to. When she called, he let it ring. He couldn't save her without sinking himself. And for the first time, he realized how often Elena had protected him without him ever noticing. How many small fires she had quietly put out so his image stayed intact. Now, no one was doing that for him. Julian's reputation didn't collapse in a single moment. It eroded. Invitations slowed. Conversations changed. People listened more carefully when he spoke and trusted him less. Meanwhile, Elena stayed silent. She didn't correct the record publicly. She didn't explain herself. She let the truth stand on its own. Because it finally could. Julian watched from a distance as her name surfaced in a new context. Professional, respected, untouched by the chaos he was drowning in. That was the hardest part. Elena wasn't winning because she fought. She was winning because she told the truth and stepped away. And Julian was left facing something he could no longer spin. The consequences of being seen clearly. The boardroom on the 42nd floor was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate without raising its voice. Julian had been there countless times. He knew the weight of the long table, the quiet authority of leather chairs, the way decisions were made before anyone spoke. This was his world, or at least, it had been. That morning, he walked in, expecting control. What he didn't expect was to see Elena. She stood near the presentation screen, reviewing notes on her laptop, posture relaxed but focused, not waiting, not hesitant. She wore a tailored blazer, understated, professional, the kind of confidence that didn't ask for attention. When she looked up and met Julian's eyes, there was no surprise on her face. Only recognition. Julian froze for half a second too long. This is Elena Moore, Adrian Hale said to the room, his voice steady. She's leading the operational strategy review today. Julian felt a slow, unfamiliar heat rise in his chest. Elena didn't look at him again. She turned to the screen and began speaking, her voice calm, clear, unhurried. She outlined inefficiencies, projected risks, and offered solutions that cut cleanly through years of layered assumptions. She didn't over-explain. She didn't soften her points. The room listened. Julian watched the executives nod, watched pens move across notepads, watched people lean forward, not toward him, but toward her. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't luck. This was competence, refined by years of being ignored. As Elena spoke, Julian recognized fragments of himself in her thinking, patterns she had once discussed with him late at night, ideas he had brushed aside because they came from her. Now, those same ideas carried weight because she carried them without him. When questions came, Elena answered with precision. She didn't seek approval. She didn't glance at Adrian for reassurance. She stood on her own authority. Julian's phone buzzed with a message he didn't open. It didn't matter. Nothing outside this room mattered anymore. For the first time, Julian felt truly outmatched. Not because Elena was attacking him, but because she didn't need to. The meeting ended with quiet agreement. Adrian thanked Elena, his respect evident but not performative. People filed out, murmuring about timelines and next steps. Julian remained seated. Elena packed her things efficiently, then turned to leave. She paused only briefly when she reached him. "Julian," she said, professional, composed. He looked up, searching her face for something familiar. Something forgiving. "You did well," he managed. Elena nodded once. "So did I." There was no triumph in her tone, no bitterness, just fact. She walked out, heels clicking softly against the polished floor, leaving Julian alone in the space that once defined him. As the glass doors closed, Julian finally understood what had happened. Elena hadn't risen to prove him wrong. She had risen because she was capable. And now, in the room where power used to belong to him alone, Julian felt the full weight of what he had lost. Not his marriage. His relevance. Sloane Whitaker had always believed she understood timing. She knew when to lean in, when to wait, when to disappear just enough to be missed. It was how she had survived corporate rooms filled with men who mistook confidence for control. She had watched Julian closely, learned his habits, his blind spots, his need to feel admired. Aligning herself with him had felt strategic, not reckless, until it wasn't. The email from Human Resources arrived at 8:12 a.m. Pending review. Your access to company systems has been temporarily suspended. Dumb. Sloane read it twice, then a third time, her pulse quickening. She forwarded it to Julian immediately. "Do you know what this is about?" No response. She tried calling. Straight to voicemail. By noon, the rumors were everywhere. Quiet conversations, doors closing, the kind of corporate silence that meant decisions were already being made without her. Sloane requested a meeting, but HR declined. "This will be handled internally," they said. Professional. Final. She understood then. Julian wasn't protecting her. He couldn't. When Sloane finally confronted him that evening, he looked exhausted, older, somehow. The confidence she had once relied on was fractured, replaced by something brittle. "They're saying I crossed boundaries," she said sharply. "That I implied influence I didn't have." Julian didn't argue. He didn't reassure her. "You did," he said quietly. The words hit harder than any accusation. Sloane stared at him, disbelief giving way to anger. "You let me? You benefited from it." Julian looked away. "That doesn't change the facts." For the first time, Sloane saw the truth clearly. Julian had always relied on others to absorb the consequences of his choices. Elena had done it silently for years. She had assumed she would be different. She wasn't. Within days, Sloane's contract was terminated. No public scandal, no dramatic exit, just a clean removal from the system, her name quietly erased from meetings she once dominated. Julian watched it happen from the sidelines, powerless. At the same time, his own position weakened. Partners questioned his judgment. Clients hesitated. The investigation into conflicts of interest expanded, pulling at threads he hadn't realized were visible. Everything he had tried to contain was unraveling. Meanwhile, Elena remained untouched. Her role expanded, her responsibilities grew. She moved through her days with focus and restraint, never. She didn't need to. One afternoon, Adrian Hale called Elena into his office. "I want you leading the next phase," he said simply. "You've earned it." Elena accepted without hesitation. As she left, she passed Julian in the hallway. He stopped, as if wanting to speak, then thought better of it. The distance between them felt deliberate now, measured. That night, Julian sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through news he no longer appeared in. Messages went unanswered. Invitations stopped arriving. For years, he had believed Elena was the quiet one, the one without leverage. He was wrong. She hadn't needed to expose anyone. The truth had done that on its own. And Julian was left staring at the wreckage, finally understanding that the women he underestimated were the ones who walked away standing. Julian did not give up easily. If there was one thing he still believed in, it was leverage. He had built his career on finding pressure points, on turning uncertainty into advantage. And when it became clear that emotional appeals no longer worked on Elena, he shifted tactics. He went legal. The separation paperwork arrived at Elena's apartment on a quiet Friday afternoon. Clean, formal, precise. Julian wasn't asking to reconcile anymore. He was contesting timelines, assets, interpretations, not aggressively, strategically, Just enough to slow things down. Just enough to remind her he could still make things difficult. Elena read the documents once, then set them aside. That evening, she met Marianne Cole in her office, the city glowing softly outside the windows. Marianne didn't seem surprised. "He's trying to regain footing," Marianne said. "This is about control, not fairness." Elena nodded. She had expected this phase. "What are my risks?" she asked. Marianne was honest. "Time, energy, emotional drag. He can stretch this out if he wants to." Elena leaned back in her chair, considering. For years, she had absorbed inconvenience to keep peace. This time, she refused to play that role. "I don't want to win," Elena said quietly. "I want to be free." Marianne smiled slightly. "Then we choose a clean ending." Over the next week, Elena made deliberate choices. She agreed to reasonable terms. She declined unnecessary disputes. She refused to engage in petty back and forth. Every response was calm, documented, final. Julian wasn't prepared for that. He expected resistance, anger, negotiation. Instead, he was met with closure. When they finally met in person, it was in a neutral conference room, sterile and quiet. No drama. No raised voices. Just two people facing the end of something that had already died. Julian looked tired. Older. The confidence that once filled the space around him had thinned. "You're really doing this," he said. Elena met his gaze steadily. "I already did." "You don't have to make it so final," Julian said. "We could take time." Elena shook her head. "I took time. You used it." Silence fell between them. Julian signed the papers with visible reluctance, pen pressing harder than necessary against the page. Each signature felt like surrender, though he would never call it that. Elena signed last. Her hand was steady. When it was done, Marianne gathered the documents, efficient and composed. "This concludes the agreement," she said. Julian stood, hesitating. "I never meant for things to go this far." Elena didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was gentle but firm. "I know," she said. "That doesn't change the outcome." She walked out without looking back. Julian remained behind, staring at the empty chair she had just left. He had played his final card, and it had failed not because Elena outmaneuvered him, but because she refused to stay in the game. That was the moment Julian understood something irreversible. Power fades when the person you're trying to control no longer wants anything from you. And Elena wanted nothing at all. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in waves, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Julian noticed the shift on an ordinary Monday morning. His inbox was lighter than usual. Fewer meeting requests, fewer questions directed his way. The kind of absence that didn't announce itself, but carried weight all the same. At the weekly partners meeting, his proposal was acknowledged, then set aside, not rejected, deferred. Someone else's idea moved forward instead. Julian sat through it, nodding automatically, but the message was clear. Confidence had been replaced with caution. By midweek, a call came from the board. It wasn't an accusation. It was worse. It was concern. They spoke about optics, about trust, about the importance of stability during transitions. Julian listened, jaw tight, as years of influence quietly slipped out of reach. He was asked to step back from certain decisions, temporarily. Temporary had always meant permanent in his world. That night, Julian returned to the apartment and poured a drink he didn't enjoy. The city lights outside the window felt distant now, decorative instead of powerful. He scrolled through his phone, stopping on old messages from Elena. "Did you eat? Text me when you land. I'm proud of you." He realized how many times he had ignored them. Days passed, then weeks. Without Elena smoothing his edges, small failures compounded. He missed deadlines, misread situations. The network he thought he controlled had been quietly supported by her patience, her organization, her emotional labor. Without it, cracks widened. One afternoon, Julian received the final notice. His role was being restructured. It was framed politely, strategically, but the meaning was unmistakable. He was no longer essential. Julian drove aimlessly that evening, ending up parked on a side street near the river. He sat in the car long after the engine cooled, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. This was the moment he had never imagined. Not ruin. not public disgrace. Irrelevance. He thought about Elena then, not as the woman who left him, but as the woman who had once believed in him without needing proof. The woman who had absorbed his neglect, defended his name, and carried the weight of his ambition so he could appear effortless. He had mistaken her loyalty for weakness. His phone buzzed. A message from a former colleague he hadn't heard from in months. "Hope you're doing well." That was all. No invitation, no follow-up. Julian closed his eyes, the truth settling fully for the first time. Elena hadn't destroyed his life. She had simply stopped holding it together. And without her, everything he built on her silence began to fall. Across the city, Elena sat in her apartment, reviewing reports for a project that bore her name. She felt no satisfaction in Julian's decline. No thrill, just distance. The collapse wasn't her revenge. It was the natural consequence of a man who believed love would wait forever. Julian had reached the bottom, not with noise, but with clarity. And this time, there was no one left to catch him. Elena Moore learned that healing didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, in ordinary moments that no longer carried tension. In mornings where she woke without bracing herself for disappointment. In evenings where silence felt restful instead of heavy. Her life no longer revolved around recovery, it simply moved forward. Work settled into a steady rhythm, projects completed, teams trusted her judgment. Her name carried weight now, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. When colleagues spoke, they listened. When she decided, it was final. That stability gave her space to feel something new. Peace. Julian tried one last time. The message arrived late one night, routed through Marianne and copied to Elena by request. It was longer than anything he had written before. Careful, reflective, he took responsibility, at least in language. He acknowledged his failures, spoke of regret, of growth, of wanting to try again slowly, properly. Elena read it once. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel triumph. She felt finished. She closed her laptop and sat back in her chair, looking around her apartment. The space was lived in now. Books stacked where she liked them, notes pinned to the wall, a plant thriving near the window, evidence of a life built with intention. Julian's words belonged to a past version of herself, the one who had waited for apologies to mean change. That woman was gone. The next morning, Elena responded with a single sentence. "I wish you well, but I'm not coming back." 2000. And it was one W have fiend devlin. She didn't add explanation. She didn't soften the message. She didn't leave room for interpretation. She closed the thread and archived it. That afternoon, Adrian Hale invited her for coffee. Not as a surprise, not as a test. Simply as time spent together, without pressure. They talked about work, about travel, about books they had both read. The conversation flowed easily, without performance or urgency. When Adrian walked her home, he stopped at the door. "I respect where you are," he said, "and I don't expect anything you're not ready for." Elena met his gaze, something warm settling in her chest. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Trust grew slowly after that, not rushed, not dramatic, built on consistency and mutual regard. Adrian didn't rescue her. He didn't complete her life. He joined it, carefully, as an equal. Weeks later, Elena stood on her balcony, watching the city at dusk. Her phone buzzed with a notification she hadn't expected. "Congratulations, Director Moore." She smiled, a quiet, genuine smile that didn't need witnesses. Somewhere across the city, Julian sat in a smaller apartment, scrolling through a life that no longer included her. He had lost the right to speak into her future, not through cruelty, but through neglect. Elena didn't think about him much anymore. She had closed that door without slamming it. And the most powerful part was this. She didn't need it to stay open. Her life was full, and for the first time, it belonged entirely to her. 1 year later, Elena Moore stood in a quiet garden just outside the city, sunlight filtering softly through the trees. There was no grand venue, no spectacle, no audience beyond the people who truly mattered. The moment didn't need witnesses to be real. She wore a simple dress, no symbols, no statements. Adrian Hale stood beside her, steady and present, his hand warm in hers. He wasn't there as a savior, a reward, or a replacement. He was there because he had walked beside her when she asked for nothing and stayed when she offered honesty instead of perfection. They spoke their vows without performance. Promises of respect, of listening, of choosing each other without assumption. When it was done, Elena felt something settle deep in her chest. Not relief, not victory. Completion. Across the city, Julian's life had settled too, but into something far quieter. He worked now in a reduced role, consulting instead of leading, advising instead of deciding. His name still opened some doors, but never fully. Trust, once fractured, had never returned to its original shape. He lived alone, his days predictable, his nights silent. Occasionally, he thought about Elena, not with longing anymore, but with clarity. He understood now what he had lost. Not a wife, a partner, a woman who had carried weight without complaint until the burden became unbearable. The lesson came too late to change the outcome, but not too late to recognize the cause. That was his consequence. Sloane Whitaker faded quickly from relevance. Without proximity to power, her influence evaporated. She moved cities, changed industries, reinvented herself quietly. The system she tried to manipulate had corrected itself, without ceremony. No one spoke her name anymore. Elena didn't follow their lives. She didn't need updates to validate her choices. The past no longer demanded her attention. In the months after the wedding, Elena continued to rise not rapidly, but solidly. She built teams that thrived, mentored women who reminded her of her younger self. She used her authority thoughtfully, aware of how fragile dignity could be when ignored. Adrian supported her without overshadowing her. Their home was calm, honest, a place where silence meant comfort, not distance. One evening, Elena stood by the window, watching the city lights glow as they always had. Manhattan was still beautiful, still ambitious, still demanding, but it no longer defined her. She thought back to the woman she used to be, the one who waited, explained, adjusted, endured. That woman had not been weak. She had been loyal beyond reason. Elena honored her now by never returning to that version of herself. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with balance. Julian lost what he failed to protect. Sloane lost what she tried to take. Elena gained what she always deserved. A life where love was returned, where effort was met, where she was chosen every day. And that was the truest form of justice. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with me right now, still listening at this moment, then something in this story has touched your heart in a quiet but real way. Maybe you saw yourself in Elena, or maybe you recognized a version of yourself in the moments of silence, waiting, hoping, enduring longer than you should have. What this story teaches us is simple, but not easy. Love that costs you your dignity is not love, it is endurance. And endurance, when it is one-sided, eventually breaks the soul. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Elena didn't control betrayal, neglect, or loss, but she reclaimed control over her response. And that changed everything. Another Stoic reminder says, "Do not waste the rest of your life worrying about others unless it affects the common good." Healing begins the moment we stop proving our worth to people who benefit from ignoring it. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something honest and personal inside, please take us keep telling stories that heal, awaken, and remind us of our value. You're not alone, and you're not late.